Good morning, everybody. Welcome again to a new session of Let's Talk About Risk. Today's session is going to cover a bit in the insurance industry and how we can use insurance to transfer the risk. In previous session, we have talked about mitigating somehow in managing the risk, but today is going to cover basically how to use insurance options and alternatives to help us transferring the risk and make our company feel more comfortable. In that sense, today we have a very special guest, Mr. Joao Buzio. Joao Buzio currently is with Marsh, where he is the regional construction leader for Latin America and the Caribbean for Marsh and McLennan practice. To give you a little background of Mr. Buzio has a major in economics by Universidade Nova de Lisboa, and also he has a major in Master of Science in Finance by University of Aberdeen. He started his career early in the 2000s with Willis, and now he has been evolving his career, being right now with Marsh McLennan. Joao, thank you so much for participating with us in these sessions. If you want to give us some initial words and perhaps complete something of I mentioned about your background.
No, thank you very much, Alfredo, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and hope we provide my some insights with regards to the insurance and how to transfer risk on these large infrastructure projects that are going on. My background is, as you said, my entire career has been in construction and infrastructure, working a lot initially with the Spanish contractors around the world, and more recently focused in helping clients in Latin America. Was involved in projects like the Panama Canal expansion, the Tower 3 and 4 of the World Trade Center in New York, etc. So construction has really been my background, as you said.
Great, thank you. As mentioned initially, we're going to just try to give some basic feedback to our viewers about how to use and how to rely on the expertise and help of an insurance broker to give you the best advice of how to cover and transfer your risk, right? And let's start with something very simple, very basic. When is the best time and when is the best moment to advise a company to go into an insurance company? Maybe formal companies, that's something for granted, but perhaps small ventures is kind of this is going to be costly, but in a very generic concept, and then we can go in depth.
Right. I think perhaps I'll separate between approaching an insurance broker and approaching an insurance company. Pardon. I think approaching an insurance broker, it's important to approach early on. And the reason for that is because as a developer builds up a project, there's a number of decisions he's going to have to do along the way. All of them that are either impacted by or could impact insurance requirements. If you're talking about what type of insurances you as a developer are going to purchase, or what type of insurances your contractor is required to purchase, or whether you are getting yourself involved in a loan agreements or non-recourse financing and you have lenders to worry about, what type of insurance that they're going to ask. It is quite fundamental to have an insurance plan very early doors, because at the point where you know what insurance plan is, and that includes knowing what you're going to buy, in what quantums, in what deductibles,
correct,
etc., and you know how the pieces of the puzzle are put together, then everything else follows through a lot easier, because there's a common understanding as to what the end goal is in terms of the insurance program. If we talk about the contract review, again, if when you're carrying out the contract review, you go back to the insurance plan and see exactly what was the main guidelines that were agreed then So that fits into the contract review and the insurance requirements therein. So in terms of insurance broking, for sure, very early doors.
Great.
In terms of approaching an insurance company, I would say nowadays in a large infrastructure project finance deal, I will try to start the entire broking process, and that includes assembling the construction insurance package of information, maybe 6 months before we are intending to start the program. Right. And there's various reasons for that. Number one, it is close enough to the date for the market to be sort of stable. You know, the insurance market is relatively volatile, so no point starting a year before.
Right.
And it's far enough from the date of inception for you to be able to do all the steps properly without feeling the pressure that maybe will deliver a worst outcome. And we always try to do 2 or 3 rounds of marketing with the market, where you try to fine-tune details and get the very best possible outcome. So I think in broad terms that would be our preconceived recommendation. Of course, sometimes that's not possible, and
right.
We've seen clients asking 3 months, for example.
And I've seen some quick contradiction, and then we're going to go into the concept. But I've seen some contradiction about lenders wanting to have a clear idea of what the insurance program is going to be. Perhaps that, talking from the client side, contractors wanting to know or to see the policies, but you don't have yet a full scope defined. You don't have a price, and obviously the risk is going to be defined by the price and exposure that the company is going to assume when they get the risk. So there's some balance there, right?
Yes. I think it is although the policies are not available, before the program actually starts, which is the inception of construction or mobilization of the first contractor on site. Before that, the insurance broker should be able to tell at least the master guidelines of what the program is going to look like, both in terms of deductibles, in terms of coverages, but they should be able to give a document that gives at least some reassurance both to the lenders or to the contractors that the insurance program being put out by the developer is of good quality and protects their exposures. Clearly, he's not going to say maybe the exact deductible, but he's going to be along the lines of deductibles not greater than something.
Right, a very reasonable guideline. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Perfect. Let's go a little bit in depth into the discussion and to give a concept. In your experience, and in my experience, what I've seen is that you can go in 3 ways in large infrastructure projects. You can go the OCIP way, that means the owner's construction insurance policy, meaning the owner provides the full policy, provides the, covers the cost. Obviously, it's going to be transferred to the contractor, but you make sure that all the insurance and the coverage are as you as an owner want. Then you have the CICIP, that is the opposite. The constructor puts in place the policy, and obviously the first 2 alternatives are mainly done for economies of scales and making sure that you are covering as much as you want in a tailored way as your company likes. Or the other way is to go individual policies that give you more flexibility. Can you perhaps share with us some advantages and disadvantages? Why go in certain way or another?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I think the first point, I think it needs to be, either whether you're a developer or whether you're a contractor, is to have a sound insurance program. So that should be the first priority of everyone. But if we think about a non-recourse finance project and use that as a benchmark, there's reasons why the lenders in particular require the owner to procure the insurances. In that case, when you have lenders' involvement, they want that loanee
Mm-hmm.
to be in control of the risk and be in control of the policies. In the end of the day, your loan contract is between the developer and the financier. So for them, it's easier to control the insurance program if they're talking to the actual person receiving the loan. So they tend to ask the owner to control the insurances. Another reason why they require a no-SIP is because of delay in startup. Again, because it's in non-recourse financing, the actual collateral is the actual project and the revenues that it generates. Yeah. It's very important for the lenders, for the owner to buy delay in startup. And only the owner can buy it. You cannot request the contractor to do it because they don't have an insurable interest. Sure. Other than penalties and liquidated damages, in which case, which is not covered by the delay in startup policy anyway. Mm-hmm. And then obviously there's the more mechanics of the policy where you have some certain advantages, such as the fact that it's one policy covering all the entities. So you have more certainty of coverage and you don't have competition between policies. There's no discussion as to which policy is going to pick up a certain damage, etc. And it could be argued that there's some efficiencies in terms of the cost, because effectively it's one policy as opposed to many, and it's just more efficient. In terms of the CSIPs, obviously the contractor is a more regular buyer of construction policies. And so because they're more a regular buyer, they might have already some structures in place, either through a global program or other mechanisms, or just repetition in purchase. Mm-hmm. So they might be able to get a good deal also from the insurance markets. So there are certain, obviously also the contractor is the one that has most of the information. When you're preparing a package, sure. It's obviously if a developer needs to put a package together, a lot of information will have to come from the contractor. So there's some advantages also in that sense, mm-hmm. of going the CSIP. But what it also often boils down to is the philosophy of risk transfer. You find contractors with very good philosophies in terms of risk transfer. They will provide sound coverage for the project, but you also find some that don't have the same level of necessity, or perhaps don't buy as much coverage as perhaps a developer would wish to have. So to reduce that uncertainty, mm-hmm. Sometimes it's better for the owner to say, okay, I'll control it. I know what I'm going to buy. In case there's a claim, the monies will come to me first. But there's a bigger level of control in terms of cost and in terms of claims.
Because cost-wise, no matter if it's a no-SIP or a CSIP, you as a client, you're going to carry the cost anyways, right? So
exactly, it always comes back to the owner as the ultimate client of a construction project, mm-hmm. right? Exactly.
And what about individual policies? Where to go? Market hunting for constructional risk, for third-party liability, or for DSU. So when is a good option to go to the market in that sense?
When is a good moment? Mm-hmm. You said.
Yes.
When is it? I mean, the moment is as I said before. If you can, start the process of collecting information 6 months before. There's no difference in terms of the timing for constructional risk or for third-party liability and DSU. On the transportation or marine cargo, obviously, often the key equipment is only going to be transported a good few months, if not years, into the project. So maybe you go into the market a bit later. But ideally, you want to start 6 months before, ideally, because there's a lot of work you want to do. If you want to do a roadshow, for example, in a big project, especially if it is a big project, a roadshow will help you because you are going to engage with an insurance company for many years. You know, if you're building, it's 2-3 years plus the maintenance period. So that's quite a long engagement, and you want to create a good relationship with them.
But is it a correct statement to say that you go to the individual coverage market hunting instead of going to an OSIP or to the CSIP when you need more flexibility, or then you are more concerned? So when is it advisable to stay away or OSIP, CSIPs and go specifically for looking for each individual type of coverage?
So, I mean, whether you are on OSIP or on CSIP, the policies will always be, they won't be packaged together. The only 3 lines that you can package together is maybe the third-party liability with the constructional risks, and the delay in startup with the constructional risks, because they need to be bought together. So there's no way a developer can buy delay in startup without the constructional risks. So, but the marine cargo and the marine cargo DSU, that would be a separate policy. The terrorism and sabotage would be a separate policy. Environmental liability would be a separate policy. And brokers tend to have specialist brokers for each of those lines of business. So whilst the client would often be talking to someone will often go to a broker that's specialist in environmental liability to go into the environmental liability market, and so forth to the other lines of insurances.
Clear, perfect. Let's talk a little bit about other type of risks that are usually not covered or considered as a part of a standard construction project coverage, like cyber risks, political risk, or pandemic risks. You know that I understand that the market offers this pandemic coverage in advance of the COVID-19 situation, and there were not many companies around the world that were inclined to obtain this risk. So maybe talk about this other type of coverage that are not as popular or as common in the industry.
Yes, I mean, there is obviously a preconception that the insurance markets doesn't often innovate. And I actually think that there are a few carriers out there who do innovate. The issue that I find is that the innovations they come up with are not economical, right? So so when you talk about liquidated damages, for example, or when you talk about obtaining coverage for extended maintenance for a period of 5 years, or when we talk about latent defects, all of those, there are carriers out there that provide those coverages. It's just when the prices are often prohibitive, especially when you're talking to a contractor and the contractor is working on a certain margin. If suddenly you have these additional insurance that are not really contractually obliged to buy, and it's quite expensive, it will tip them to be uncompetitive if they're bidding against other contractors, right? So I do think that the insurance market does provide innovation. It's just that it's not economical innovation. And that's where I think the insurance market needs to work a lot more on. Insurance market, and when I say insurance market, I mean insurance companies with brokers. I think brokers also have a big responsibility in that regard. In terms of cyber, that's an emerging risk for many companies, and the insurance market does provide solutions for cyber. What has happened, though, is whilst historically you'd find some element of cyber coverage even on standard construction insurance policies, they've now removed that option from the standard construction policy, and you need to buy a cyber-specific insurance policy to cover those risks. But the construction policies, they never really insured more emerging risks in the cyber field, such as hacking or files becoming corrupted, or especially now that you have the building information modeling systems in many big infrastructure projects.
Exactly. That's very well.
Exactly. That's so actually the construction policy was not very fit to deal with that kind of emerging cyber risks, and having a separate cyber policy definitely assists not only to cover the reposition or the reconstitution of those documents, but also if you think about if the whole system collapses and the contractor cannot actually do any work, you have an idle project for days and days, and that all impacts on the ending of the project. But the cyber insurance market is able to provide solutions in that.
Mm-hmm.
And then pandemic, obviously, quite a few years ago, there were carriers who were providing pandemic insurance. But as you'd probably guess, there were very few companies around the globe that were actually enticed to buy it. And as it often happens in insurance markets, now that there is a heightened sense of pandemic risk, the other thing happens. The insurance market retracts, and now that the clients actually want to buy it, the insurance market saying maybe not.
Too late.
So it's a circular situation with those type of risks. But I do think that over the coming months and coming years, solutions will be available in the market for pandemic risk, and obviously the world and companies are much better at dealing with that risk, and that should also give insurance companies a lot more positivity when considering that type of novel risks in years to come.
Excellent. You mentioned a couple of minutes ago about that sometimes these innovation policies are not cost efficient, and you go to alternative markets. Let's talk a bit about Lloyd's. Is Lloyd, first, correct me if I'm wrong, is Lloyd's what is considered an alternative market? And if that is the case, or where do you need to go to such non-standard, let's call it, because Lloyd's obviously now a standard, but when do you go to those alternatives as a company?
I think it's fair to say that the Lloyd's market is as much as a market where you go for alternative risk transfer, as it is a market where you can go for the more normal risks.
Mm-hmm.
So up until very recently, the Lloyd's were writing very standard construction policies. So they not and they were very active in construction. It was only very recently where they significantly reduced their appetite for construction because of results. There was a review about 2 years ago where they made a profitability analysis of the syndicates. And they basically said, the worst performing syndicates, they have to leave Lloyd's. And many of those were in construction. So Lloyd's, yes, it is a place for you to go for alternative risk transfer. It is also a market where you can go for the normal policies. However, there's a whole world out there outside of Lloyd's and insurance companies that work on alternative risk transfer. And so even the most reputable reinsurance companies, the household names that you see often associated with the programs, all of those are likely to have an alternative risk transfer department. So the same markets would apply, just different underwriting and different modeling goes behind those underwriting.
Okay, excellent. Joao, let's go to our final topic. And first, thank you so much for your time and giving them such insightful information. Let's go a little bit to the basics again. So we know different alternatives that we can go. We have talked about the two different markets, the difference between insurance. So as a client, when would you advise, let's transfer this risk rather than, I know that this is more a conclusion of your risk management program that you analyze and see which risks are not being able to mitigate, but which are the most common risks that you will advise your client to transfer? What have you seen in the industry? Which are the typical policies that a construction program shall transfer rather than assume?
Yes, I mean, I think there's 2 points there. Obviously, the contractual requirements often a lot of the risk transfer decisions, it boils down to what is required by contracts, either the loan agreement or the EPC agreements. So that's an element. But then once we go beyond that, there's additional risks that the client can decide to transfer, and obviously critical among that is how much to transfer. How much as a client do you want to carry as a deductible, or how much limits does the client want to pay for?
Right.
And those decisions are obviously done using studies. Many of the insurance brokers will have a risk management division that will be able to do analysis on what is the capacity of the clients to retain risk, both at the top layer with a big or low limit and the bottom layer as a deductible. They will also calculate for you the total cost of risk, so how much risk you're retaining plus the premium, and see what is the efficient risk transfer quantum that you want to do to the insurance market. So all of those analyses, studies would be available for a client. But on a big project, and again, we always use as a benchmark a non-recourse finance deal because there's so many stakeholders involved, there's so much double checking into the program. If we use that as a benchmark of what is a good insurance program or the guidelines of a good insurance program, then it's a physical risk to the works, either by earthquakes or natural catastrophe or just more mundane perils, or because of defects in design, workmanship, and materials, or even the damage that can occur during the maintenance period of the project. So that's some of the risks. You have then obviously the third-party liability. You cannot live without it, or most clients cannot live without it.
Yes. The
delay in startup, the transportation risks of the project, and now more emerging because of the public perception is obviously environmental liability, not just the sudden and accidental, because that you can find on a normal DPR policy, but the gradual pollution that comes along. And when you think about the ESG emerging theme coming around, and obviously the E within ESG, that's certainly something that more lenders and more clients are becoming increasingly aware and more focused on.
Right. Yeah, and perhaps if you forget one of these environmental risks, your lender is going to tell you anyways, hey, you need this one.
Right. No, absolutely. We see nowadays, not only with lenders, but also with insurance companies. We have where if a project is within a certain sector, often, especially in power and depending on the type of fuel, but essentially natural resources type projects, often insurance companies need to refer to an ESG department to know if they have the green lights to actually quote on it. If they get a red light, they won't even be able to touch it. And we see that lenders, we see that credit agencies equally are creating this type of ESG departments that are becoming involved in the actual decision making that they do when analyzing a project, either to loan or to provide a credit rating or just to insure.
Right. And I've seen also that the lenders side of the industry is also getting more sophisticated. I remember a few years ago, basically you dealt from a client side, like with the LTA. Now you have a risk technical part. So there's more and more getting these sophistications in the system.
Right? Absolutely. There's we see, and it's not unusual for us to be on a call just before financial close with where you have the lender's technical advisor, the lender's insurance advisor. You have like maybe 15, 16 people at the call trying to into those tunnel negotiations to try and get the loan agreement agreed. So for sure, you have nowadays a lot of attention into risk and insurance matters.
Absolutely. Joao, thank you so much. for your time, for your valuable expertise. It's been really a very insightful discussion. I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to say, perhaps about your practice, or please feel free.
No, just Alfredo, thank you so much for inviting me to this call. And I hope I was able to provide some insights into my industry. I've been working in insurance and in construction for 16, 17 years. And it is a good industry to be associated with. So I'm very, very happy to share with the audience how the market is acting when it comes to construction and infrastructure. And thank you very much for making it part of it.
Very valuable. Thank you so much. Joao, thank you. And hopefully in the near future, we can have, again, a different discussion. Thank you, Joao.
Phenomenal. Thank you very much, Alfredo. Thank you.
Bye-bye.